what we are going to do is we'll talk about problem statement. I'll tell you a glimpse about like how what problem we are trying to solve. This is a collaboration with Bayer. So we'll talk about like how we actually approach a particular solution. So this is a solution that we have been building for last 2 to 3 years. And then with GenAI, how we actually transformed it for better, right? So be with me. I'm going to tell you, how many here have actually worked on LLM applications before? What is LLM? How many of you know? Large language model, yeah, awesome. How many of you want to work on GenAI application? Yeah, that's the crowd I want. So if you want to work on GenAI application, I think I'm going to tell you, and that you can directly apply. Go back and hope I do the justice. Ask me questions afterwards if I don't. So the problem statement is, like, for example, for the drug discovery, I think we said takes about 10 to 15 years. It's this funnel, right? So where if let's say I want to create or create a drug or medicine for diabetes, right? What we do is these scientists, there are like a lot of scientists, and what they start doing is they start a lot of experiments, start finding out, okay, what all compounds might be helpful to actually treat this particular disease. And maybe they start with thousands of compounds. Okay, they experimented on it for like years, maybe 3 years, 4 years, whatever. And then they narrow it down to few hundred, let's say couple of hundred. And now you have those couple of hundred compounds with you who are actually, or you take those compounds and start testing on animals. You've seen that movie? They tested on rats, rabbits. You've seen that, right? Now, out of those 200 compounds, maybe then they taste it and then spend years again here, and then they narrow it down to few compounds, let's say 4 or 5. And then they start testing it on humans. It's called clinical testing. The testing that happens on animals is called preclinical testing. This is clinical testing. And then, once the clinical testing is done, you have one medicine out that you go for FDA approval, then it goes for monitoring, and it's a long process. So when Bayer approached us, we were actually, they wanted to specifically focus on preclinical domain. That's when the testing happens on animals, right? And the problem that they were facing is they have a system, they have a lot of data. Bayer is a 50-year-old company, a lot of studies that they have done so far. And those 50, whatever 50 years of data is not searchable. So they wanted to build Google for this preclinical domain, right? Like they approached us 3 years ago. So Google was still the search thing. And they wanted to give that search experience to our scientists and researchers so that they avoid duplicate efforts and save cost and lives. Does that make sense? Do you see this is valuable? But I can tell you more value once you look at this slide. So if I want to do one 4-week study, 1 month study, let's say on monkey, it costs €1 million. Can you imagine? It costs €1 million to just do testing on monkeys. And it's not just about money, right? So actually, in the process of days, these animals are sacrificed. So just for 1 month study, about 70 to 80 rats are sacrificed. Oh, rats. Dogs, about 20 dogs might be sacrificed. Monkeys, about 10 to 12 monkeys might be sacrificed. So there are like similar animals are being used across these different studies. So it's not that only for that study it is done, but still you're actually impacting directly the lives of those animals. And let's say if you're able to find this exact study, which was done, let's say 20 years ago, wow, you actually save all of this. And that's like, even if you save one such study per year, that's a huge thing. Don't you think? So what we did was, the problem that we were kind of approached was search problem. Google search, find the problem. So what we did is we kind of went ahead, we built data platforms. So we asked them, okay, what all data sources you have? We got all the data sources together, ETL, made that available in the search search way, and basically give them more like a user interface. We always think about it, any approach as data as a product, right? I think we just covered that. And from the data as a product point of view, we started thinking about, okay, we just don't want to kind of bring the data together. We want to give it a search experience. What is the best search experience we could go? Once we give a search experience, what is the best way so that we can actually show that data to the user? So for example, the user interface that you see here, it's basically that, does it work? Okay. So basically what you see is like some boxes here, and you can see the species, and then I can enter that I want to search for rat species. You hit enter, and then you're presented with all the studies done on rats. Fair enough. But so for this, what we have done is like we had structured data. We had actually pulling data from all the structured different sources. Where, like, for example, let's say I'm a scientist, not data scientist, I'm a scientist. I would go into a system and I would write, okay, I'm going to start a new study, and then this study is going to be this much time duration. I'm going to perform this study on, let's say, such animal and all of that. So I'm going to enter this into the system, and we are going to, those systems are our sources. But the funny thing is, these sources, these systems were actually there for like last 10 years, maybe 15 years. The bio as a whole is actually there for 50 years. So a lot of structured data gets corrupted over system migrations. I think all of you know the rest of the story. So that's the structured data that we had to focus on. But what happened is we also have unstructured data. And the great part is, if I'm a scientist, if I'm doing any experiment, what is the final thing that I produce? If you are actually going to work on a project, what is the final thing that you produce? Like on your academic project, what do you produce? Report, right? So those reports are available for the last 50 years. And all those reports contain all the detailed information that we don't have unstructured information, right? So when GenAI came into picture, we said, oh, wow, now we have a lot of unstructured data. And all of that data is going to be now helpful. And then all of that data information is available. So we said, I think we solved the search problem. Let's go beyond it. And we started with a vision that we now need to actually sit with the researcher and actually help them with what they do directly by empowering research, right? And with this, what we started is, we started moving from the search problem to more of a ask problem. How many of you use Perplexity here? Few hands. If you are not, you should. Try it out. And we'll talk about how Perplexity is also built. Maybe I think that's also something similar thing that we're talking about here. That's an ask problem, right? And what I mean by the ask problem is, as a researcher, I'm going and looking for a particular information into my application because I want to solve a problem. Why not ask, right? Instead of me look for a rat study, find the right study information, I go through the report and then get the information. Why can't I directly ask, right? And GenAI is able to solve that problem for us. So we solve the ask problem, but that is like one phase of it. Now, if you're able to solve ask problem, you could actually do better. And that's like, now you can actually give the application task, and the application will perform that task for you. That's a do phase. And we'll talk about this phase as well. And this is a phase where, let's say, if our scientist needs to write long reports, 50-page reports you want to write. Now, instead of me finding information, munging it, or let's say if me going and asking information, munging it, I just tell it, okay, I want to write this report. This is the information, maybe use those studies, and I get a report. That's cool, right? So this is something that we are actually building. And I will talk about all of this. So let's get into the technical details. How many of you have heard about RAG? Wow. I'm going to talk about RAG, a small introduction to it. So for example, for those who do not know, LLM is large language model, right? For example, when you go to ChatGPT, you ask a question, you get an answer, LLM is there. So when you ask a question, you get an answer. So for example, if I ask a question, what is the meaning of life in 10 words? Such a good answer it gives, like finding purpose, joy, connection. I think it kind of covers good ground. It's because it's kind of based on a lot of pre-trained data. But if I ask a question, what animal was used in a particular study? Now, obviously this study is like made up study ID, but it will say, I don't know. It may say, I don't know. It may give you some random answer by hallucinating. But thinking good, happy case, it says, I don't know, right? Because it obviously does not have access to binary data. But if I give it a context, now what I mean by the context is basically, if I provide this information that this is the study ID and here is the context, and the first line in the context is the same study ID, and I give some subject information. Now it is able to infer the information that I'm asking, and then it's able to give the answer. Make sense? But what is the use of this, right? Like this is like good for, like, for example, doing comprehension type questions. Like we had thought maybe, at least I thought maybe 10 years ago, if I had this, and then if I'm doing an online exam, maybe this is the best thing I can have. I can just copy paste things and then get answers quickly. But what we're doing is, the context that you see there, it's a static context, maybe a prompt that you might see. But what we could do is we could populate that context dynamically. That means you have the question, but the context is something that you can populate dynamically based on the question. So you have a question. And now, earlier you were like, in the previous slide, we were asking that question directly to LLM. We say, no, we'll not ask directly to LLM, we'll ask it to a system. Let's consider it like a black box. It's a system. What it does is it is going to actually look at the question, and that system has access to all of the information that you have, and it is going to pick up the right context for that question, right? So you have a book, that's a 300-page book. Each book, every page of that book has, let's say, 5 paragraphs. So you have like whatever, you do the math. Those were the number of paragraphs. And if I ask a question, it is actually able to locate the right paragraph and give it to you. That happens, then I can take that paragraph, take that question, give it to LLM, boom, you have an answer, right? Now, this system is called information retrieval. It is powered by something called as semantic search. Heard about semantic search? You search for ice cream, you get ice cream results. You also get gelato results. You search for soccer, do you get football? Semantic search, right? That's the keyword search is if I search for football, I only get football, playing football, and all of that. If I search for soccer, if I'm getting football, the semantic search is involved there. Similar logic. I won't go into the details of this, I think, but you will need to kind of, if you are curious about it, and a lot of you want to build applications, you should really learn this. But this is great. This works, but this works for very small data, right? And the scale that we're talking about, and by the way, what I'm talking about is actually productionized. So we have this running in production. So the scale that we're talking about is we have about 2 million chunks in our database. We have our data that this is running on is like 100 GB. So that's a good scale. And then if you want to make it work with such scale, this will not work. What you need is like a little bit of a pre-processing, and you need a little bit of post-processing, right? So there's a semantic search involved, but before you get to semantic search, maybe you can do something additional steps. You can do the after also some additional steps. All good? Later. So this is our Q&A architecture currently, and then this is basically what we have done. And on the right-hand side, what you see is our tech stack. Don't worry about reading all of this. I will explain everything. So let's take an example, for example. If you read the question, I hope the question is visible towards end. Awesome. So the question is like where any of the clinical findings were observed in a particular study ID. And the findings are like, for example, piloerection, ataxia, loose faces, right? So if you look at the question, if you just give it as a semantic search, you may get, as I said, we have 2 million records. 2 million records, you may have a lot of similar things, maybe in different studies. We are interested in a particular study. So you may get, semantic search might give you that result we don't want. And what happens is, then what we do is, first thing we do is we extract keywords from this information, because I think keywords, we are all, like for example, BM25, I don't know, TF-IDF, all these algorithms are around like for what, 50 years? Maybe more than, definitely like more than my age. They're still the best algorithms out there for keyword search. You can do keyword search for free almost free. It's like no latency. I always love keyword search. I can give many reasons for adding keyword search. So you do keyword search using like what you first extract keywords using language model. You give it a model and then it says, okay, I think from looking at this question, piloerection, ataxia, loose faces, I think these are the most important keywords. We also tell language model, hey, if someone asks questions, this is how our database is structured. And you can apply where conditions based on these columns. So it looks at the prompt and says, oh, there is a study ID. That could be a where condition. So I just pick up the where condition. And now what happens is, okay, and then what happens is like, why do you need such where conditions? Because I had 2 million chunks. If I just apply this where condition with a study ID, what happens is my chunk, my vector space reduces down to 50, 100, something like that, which is far better. Second thing what we do next is we basically take that question. Humans are not always great at asking questions. We are like fond of Google search, so maybe we don't always want to prompt nicely. So we ask it to actually, so user is going to ask a question, take that question, make it such that it is good for semantic search, and then make multiple forms of such questions. So we give such prompt, and then what language model does is it generates such prompt where you have like, if you look at it, like maybe just to give example, I can't really point it, but the loose feces is similar to diarrhea, right? Now, if I search for loose feces in my document and diarrhea in my document, maybe it'll bring slightly different chunks. So what we're doing is we're trying to maximize the chances of getting the right information. So we form the same question slightly differently. And now what we have is like 5 different questions. We also have some keywords and we also have some where conditions. Now I take all of this together and give it to the database. So we actually do a weighted hybrid search and we get back some chunks. Now out of 2 million chunks, we get about 20 chunks. Now these 20 chunks are most likely going to have the answer to your question. But I think someone was talking about needle in a haystack test. You remember, I think about cloud, you saw that there is loss function, there is loss that happens. So you can't actually fill in the context with a lot of information. You have to be really precise about what you're putting in the context. So what we do is we look at these 20 chunks and we say, okay, I think these 20 chunks, definitely good. We go further optimization. That is post-processing now. We go for further optimization and we say, we give those 20 chunks and a question to something called as cross-encoder model. Now, cross-encoder model is actually good at inferring. You give it 2 information, 2 chunks. It says how semantically similar they are. So, are they similar? And give it a score. So, what we do is we take that cross-encoder, we give like individual chunks and question to the cross-encoder model. It tells you these are the top 7 chunks that you can take. And now these are like precise information for you to actually answer a particular question. And then you get basically a final answer. If you want to take away one slide from this talk, this is the slide. So this is good. This works quite well. I want to give you a quick demonstration about like specific questions. You may not understand it, but like what you see on the left is like our user's reaction. So for example, someone asked like, find compounds which are associated with fluorosis. Now fluorosis is usually associated with crop science. And when this use case came to our people, someone just tried it out and they got good results. I mean, there was no way to find out this information earlier. But it doesn't stop there. Like, for example, you can ask questions which are like, okay, give me this type of study, but exclude the other type of studies. Like, give me liver toxicity, but exclude other toxicities. And that works. That was really good. But what blown our users' mind is that someone proposed a study design for in vivo gentox study. And it actually went back, looked for gentox studies, genetic toxicity studies called gentox. And then looked at those references and proposed a study design, which is quite nice, right? So this works. This is really good. This is ask. Remember? Search, ask, do. The challenge with this is the fundamental limitation of this architecture, maybe I can go back, is if you look at the last step, right, there are only 7 chunks here. So if your question is based only on the 7 chunks, you can answer. If not, let's say if your question is too complex and maybe needs 30 chunks, it won't answer, right? It can't. What do you do? So if your question is complex, so if it's a simple question, all good. But if it's a question which is complex, won't work. So why? What we can do? Like if I give it to a human, what a human would do? If I, let's say, give one of you a question which is complex, first thing human would do is break down that question, right? First thing you would do is take a complex question, break it down, make it smaller. Now you have smaller questions. You can give it to this architecture. Sorry, so you have smaller questions. Then what you, as a human, would do is human will then look at a simple question, maybe go to study database, manually look at the report, answer individual question, right? And then actually come up with the final answer. Make sense? Maybe it doesn't end here. What you do is now you have an answer to a complex question. I'll go back. I'll take that question, give it to, check. I have a question. I have an answer. Is that answering the question? Oh, there is something missing. Let me go and find out, right? And then I'll loop over it. I will do it as long as I have the full answer. Does that make sense? Everyone does that? Every one of you are here problem solvers. I'm sure you resonate with that, right? Yes? Okay. Allah is still speaking. Everyone's not sleeping. Okay, awesome. So now what happens is, you have this. You have simple question. You can answer. You have simple answer. This is like basically the query architecture that we built. You can take simple question. You can have a good answer. What is missing here is someone who could take a very complex question and then convert that into smaller questions. And someone who could take all those answers, combine that into complete answer. And repeat in a loop as long as you have the full answer, right? This is called agent. How many of you heard agent? Right. This is the guy who is going to take your job. Everyone should know. I'm just kidding. It will not. But what happens is now you have an agent. Now agent can actually, okay, I'm going to explain this diagram slightly differently, okay? So now you have an agent. Agent is, if you kind of think about it, it's like a personified version. What agent does is you have an agent and both of them are the same guy. Both of them are same agent. So the agent is actually having access to a system that can answer questions. With me, I can call it a tool, which is called RAG tool. Everyone knows RAG now, and now you have a tool which is RAG tool, right? Now, whatever we did so far just became one tool. You can have more such tools. For example, you can have SQL. If you have SQL databases, you can have a database tool, which can take simple question, convert it to SQL query, execute that out of the database, and you have answer, right? You could do web search. How many of you go on ChatGPT and search for, okay, what is the news for today? Does that work? Does that work? It works. What it does? It browses now new things. It was not working last year. It works now. It goes and does some browsing. That's a tool, right? So that's basically it. And then what happens is now when you have such a system, this unlocks many complex use cases, right? Now you have someone at your disposal who has access to right tools, who can do stuff for you, Remember, search, ask, do stuff for you. And this unlocks many use cases. I'm going to give you an example use case that we are currently working. This is in production so far. What the next slide is something that we are working on. So the use case that we are talking about is called writing assistant, okay? So looking at this, our users came and said, wow, this is fascinating. So our users are all scientists. So users are asking, okay, I want to write an IND report. People with the healthcare background might relate. I want to write an IND report using 15 studies. To give you a perspective, one study equals 1,000 pages or more. I have 15 such studies, and I want to write one report based on all of those studies. The challenge is here, they take months to write such reports. This is error prone, right? you need to construct complex tables. And if you see such reports, you'll actually see it. Like there are a lot of tables, a lot of information. And you are getting all of this information manually, like you're working on it. So what if this is the person from the last slide? This person has access to, this agent has access to all the information that you have. Like for example, you have access to tools. So if you ask it to, like, let's say, write a particular section, it will write a particular section. It needs just what information you want, and it will do it for you. Now you need, what we can do is we can ask such agent, I'll now should say agent, to write, to search information and research that information for you. But what we want is, like, we want to write a report, right? So this agent do not know about what is a report, what contains in a particular report, like how many sections should be there in the report, what information should go in what section, and all of that. So the writer then, for example, is specializing into writing such information. And then let's say we can have a reviewer who is specializing, kind of a QA, specializing into actually, is the information that writer has written based on the actual facts? Is it hallucinating? Is it doing something else, right? Is there some information missing? Can I add more information? Now, this is called a multi-agent system. And we could repeat and go on doing this until you have all the information, right? Until you have, like, the full report written. This is something that keeps me up. This is fascinating. So I want to give you a brief about, like, what is the perspective of impact. So currently, like, if for simple answers, right, like users used to take days, that happens in now minutes. For complex questions, it used to take weeks, happens in minutes. Writing and editing reports, months, minutes. Wow, right? And then visualizing information, seconds. Cool, right? This is not free. So I think building POC on Gen AI, oh my God, day one, you give it to the client. Making it production, it is not easy. Making agents in production, oh, different challenge. So it's important for us to really take a step back and understand what it really takes to actually build trust. Because at the end of the day, users need to use it, right? Your application, otherwise what is the point? And developers need to develop. Now, why I'm saying that is because if you're actually developing an application, what happens is, you know if you click on a button, you know exactly what is going to happen. If you ask a question to language model, you don't know what is going to answer. It will answer, like, right now one thing, next time it will answer something else, right? And the models are getting better, but I think we started like a year ago. And then, so when we started off, the first thing that we wanted was observability. And here, this is like when, if someone is asking question, I want to know, because this is like not one LLM call, you saw that? We are making first call, second call, third call, fourth call, like many LLM calls that are going on. And then how do I make sure that whatever calls are being made to LLMs are like really, like, I can see exactly what's going on in every call, right? Observability is a must. And if you go for the complex agentic system, it even kind of increases the impact. But currently, I think the tooling that we have is still, I would say, limited on how best you can actually get into the observability. Second thing is, and the most important thing for users, is explainability and transparency. As a scientist, I am working for 30 years. I have a way of working. And now I give you a system that actually changes my way of working. If I want to change that, I really need to tell them, like, what is really going on behind the scenes, right? So if I ask a complex question, I should actually break that down question into some simpler questions. But those smaller questions need to be actually visible to the client, visible to the user, so that they understand what is really going on behind the scenes. So the first thing is, we need to work on the explainability. What that means is, you basically have a question, like tell the users on exactly what steps you are taking to arrive at an answer. Second important thing is citations. I can't emphasize on this enough, right? So for example, if you are answering a particular question, we need to actually tell, like, what that answer was based on. Maybe it was based on 4 study reports. That is not sufficient. I can tell, like, these are the 4 study reports it was based on. But what I want to tell you is, for every line in your answer, I should be in a position to tell exactly like this line was based on this particular report, on this particular page, from this section, from this sentence. If I give that confidence to the user and make all of this information available just by hovering over a link, I think that is fantastic, right? So I think that is going to kind of give them more willingness to actually use and adopt such things. And then they click on a link and then they directly have access to that paragraph. So I think citations and explainability are must. Then I need to actually rush. Then we have a right cognitive architecture, building agentic systems. I know, for example, I have worked on a particular framework. We built it for a couple of months. I scrapped all of it and then started over again, because you need really good control on these agentic behaviors. Otherwise, if you just give it, like, make it more autonomous, they look fancy, you can't really trust it to actually get into production. And eval strategy, and that is like, oh my God. This, I don't have enough time to actually talk on this. I can talk on any of these points for hours, but evals are a must. You should start, if you are building, all of you who are building, wants to build their applications, first question you should go and ask your client, okay, what are all the questions that user is going to ask? Give me all the questions and answers and build eval system from day one. That is something I can tell you from my experience, because you can't just wipe check. You remember wipe check? You just can't do wipe check. That is like, so I remember my PO, I still need to tell you this story. So I think first showcase, day before showcase, my PO calls me and said, Sarang, there is something wrong. There is something wrong, I don't know what. Now I look at the system, I'm asking questions that we had asked earlier, and we are saying, something wrong, I don't know what, right? Having evals helps from that wipe check towards really end of the, where you're actually showcasing it to the user. You need to have right system controls. You need to have like proper security guardrails. This is extremely important if you're building a system which is like outward facing for public. Otherwise, I mean, if you have, this is like one thing you should definitely consider, security aspect, if you're making this system more public facing, right? For us, it's more internal facing. And these are not exhaustive lists, you need to continue improving. So, not a lot of time for challenges. If you're interested, I'm available, we can talk. So we had a lot of challenges with PDF extractions. We had like 50 years. So we had some PDFs which was written on typewriter. A lot of them were scanned photos. When building agents, we faced a lot of issues. I think I spoke about like we kind of really delegated a lot of code. Models behave really erratically. Trust me. So something that works extremely well today is not working tomorrow. And that day I'm thinking, okay, what is wrong? I'm like, this was literally working. I ran evals and I see lower scores. I have no clue what's going on. And then it appears that, so we are using model from one of our data, the platform team. And the platform team tell that this is the same model, newer version. So newer version do not mean better version. So it's like newer is not always better. So data size, we have a lot of data. And then I think we saw like what we did, what all steps we take to actually make this application work with such data. Grounded answers. You want answers to be actually accurate based on facts. We are talking about compliance critical stuff here. So you cannot, for example, if you have, what does it say? So if you can't, the error budget here is very less. You cannot have any errors in your answers. And that is very interesting. And then evals. Run evals quickly. So for example, for us evals, it used to take about 50 minutes to run just one data set. We kind of brought it down to 4 minutes. You need to run them quicker. You need to run them faster and more frequently. All right, so this is like, we have published a couple of case studies. It's in the public domain. I should have put it actually QR code, but maybe you could Google ThoughtWorks Buyer AI, you'll see basically this. And the second case study, this is my awesome team. This is team from Buyer, and thank you. Open for questions.